After I refused to bankroll my daughter's over-the-top wedding, she iced me out completely. Then, out of the blue, get an invite to a family reconciliation dinner. But when I arrive, there are 3 lawyers waiting with legal documents. Brenda gives me this smug look and says, "Sign over power of attorney, or you'll never see your grandson again." I calmly reach into my purse, dial a number, and say, "You know, that crimson dress hanging in my closet always felt like a reminder of better days." I'd worn it to Brenda's high school graduation, then her college commencement, and later to celebrate her first big promotion. Each time, she'd gush about how elegant I looked, how proud she was to have me as her mother. Now, as I smoothed the fabric over my 62-year-old frame, I wondered if this would be the last time I'd dress up for my daughter. It had been 3 weeks since our blow-up argument about her wedding budget. $65,000. That's what Brenda and her fiancé Chad had demanded. I cough up. Not asked, demanded. As if my late husband Robert's life insurance money, the nest egg I'd carefully stashed away for my retirement, was somehow their birthright. "Mom, you're being selfish," she'd said, her voice sharp as a winter wind. "You're hoarding all that money while we're trying to start our lives together. Don't you want me to be happy?" I tried to explain that happiness didn't require imported Italian marble for a bathroom Reno or a destination honeymoon in the Maldives. I offered $15,000, a truly generous sum that would cover a beautiful local ceremony. But Brenda had looked at me with such contempt, such cold calculation, that I barely recognized the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them sunshine flowers. The invitation, then the follow-up phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was puttering around in my small garden behind the duplex I'd downsized to after Robert's passing. Brenda's voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we've both been too stubborn. Could we talk over dinner? I want to work things out." My heart lifted despite myself. Maybe the silence between us had given her time to reflect. Maybe becoming a mother herself, she was 3 months along, barely showing, had awakened something in her that understood sacrifice, understood the weight of protecting what you'd built. "I'd like that, sweetheart," I'd said, already planning what I'd cook, what I'd say to rebuild that bridge between us. "Actually, Chad and I thought we'd take you out somewhere nice. You know, that Italian place on Elm Street, Luigi's?" It was where Robert had taken me for our 25th anniversary, where the tables were cozy and the lighting was soft enough to hide the tears I suspected we'd both shed as we found our way back to each other. Now, as I applied my lipstick with the steady hand of a woman who'd learned to project strength even when she felt brittle, I allowed myself a moment of hope. Maybe Brenda's pregnancy had given her some perspective. Maybe she'd realized that family meant more than extravagant weddings and Instagrammable celebrations. The drive to Luigi's took me through the neighborhood where I'd raised Brenda and her older brother, Mark, past the elementary school where I'd volunteered in the library, past the park where I'd pushed her on swings until my arms ached, past the community center where I taught her to waltz before her first formal dance. Each landmark felt like a page in a book I wasn't sure I wanted to close. Luigi's looked exactly as I remembered. Warm brick facade, window boxes overflowing with late autumn mums, the soft glow of candlelight visible through sheer curtains. I checked my watch. 6:30 p.m. right on the dot. Brenda had always appreciated punctuality, a trait she'd inherited from her father. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to a corner table where Brenda was already seated. My daughter looked radiant in that way only pregnant women can, her skin glowing, her dark hair cascading around her shoulders. She wore a designer dress I didn't recognize, something that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. "Mom," she said, rising to embrace me. For a moment, breathing in her familiar perfume, I felt that familiar surge of maternal love that had defined my life for 34 years. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." And I meant it. Whatever our differences, whatever pain lay between us, she was still my daughter. "How are you feeling? Any morning sickness?" "Better now. The second trimester's supposed to be easier." She touched her belly with a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Chad should be here any minute." He got held up at the office. Chad Sterling, 36 years old, ambitious, charming when he wanted to be. He worked for a commercial real estate firm and had that kind of confidence that comes from a life without significant setbacks. I tried to like him, tried to see what Brenda saw beyond his expensive suits and his casual dismissal of anyone he deemed less successful. "I'm glad you called," I said, settling into my chair. "I've missed you." Something flickered across her face. Was it guilt? Regret? But before I could examine it further, Chad appeared at our table, not alone, but followed by 3 guys in dark suits carrying briefcases. "Mrs. Johnson," Chad said, his smile too bright, too practiced. "Thanks for joining us." The men took seats around our small table, instantly turning our intimate dinner into what felt like a corporate board meeting. My stomach clenched as I realized this wasn't some random coincidence. This was a setup. "Brenda," I said carefully. "Who are these gentlemen?" "Mom, these are some of Chad's colleagues." Her voice was steady, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "They have some paperwork they'd like you to take a look at." One of the men, silver-haired with the kind of predatory grin I'd learned to recognize in my years working as a secretary at a law firm, leaned forward. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Richard Kirk, Chad's attorney. We've prepared some documents that we believe will be beneficial for everyone involved." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same one I'd felt 3 weeks ago when Brenda had first laid out her demands. But this time, instead of just anger, I felt something colder, something that had been building in those weeks of silence. "What kind of documents?" I asked, already knowing this. Conversation was about to go south. Chad cleared his throat. "It's really quite simple, Mrs. Johnson. We're asking you to sign a power of attorney that would allow us to manage your financial affairs. Given your age and the fact that you're living alone now, it just makes sense to have someone younger handling your investments, your property decisions." "My age?" I repeated quietly. "I'm 62, Chad, not 92. "Of course," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "but you have to admit, these things are complex. Real estate markets, investment portfolios. It's not something you should have to worry about." I looked at Brenda, waiting for her to say something, anything, to show that this wasn't her idea. But she just sat there, silent, hands folded primly in her lap, eyes glued to the tablecloth. The attorney pushed a manila folder across the table. "If you could just sign here, and initial there, we can get everything squared away tonight." I opened the folder, even though I knew exactly what I'd find. Power of attorney documents that would give Chad and Brenda complete control over my bank accounts, my house, my insurance policies, everything Robert and I had worked our butts off for 40 years to build. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the earthquake erupting inside my chest. Brenda finally looked up, and the expression in her eyes was one I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, final. "Then you won't see your grandson grow up," she said flatly. "It's your choice, Mom. But I think you should know that Chad and I have been talking to a lawyer about grandparents' rights. Apparently, they're pretty limited, especially when the grandparent has a history of being difficult." The restaurant seemed to fade away. The soft jazz music, the clinking glasses, the murmur of other diners, it all dissolved into white noise. I just stared at my daughter, this woman I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless childhood illnesses, celebrated through every single milestone, and tried to figure out exactly when she'd become a complete stranger. "I see," I said quietly. I reached into my purse, past my wallet, past my reading glasses, past the faded photo of Brenda and Mark I'd carried for years. My fingers closed around my phone, and I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. "Mom, Brenda's?" Voice had a shaky edge to it now. "What are you doing?" I pressed the call button and waited for that familiar voice to answer. "Hey, Mark, it's Mom. I need you to come to Luigi's restaurant on Elm Street. Now." "Yeah, I know it's late. I know you've got work in the morning. Just get here." I ended the call and placed the phone carefully on the table next to that manila folder. "I think," I said, looking straight at Brenda, "before I sign anything, there's someone else who wants to say a few words." the counterattack. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Chad shifted in his seat, that confident smirk finally starting to crumble around the edges. The three lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, the kind those seasoned predators share when their prey suddenly stops acting like prey. "Mom," Brenda whined, her voice taking on that familiar, irritatingly childish tone she'd perfected as a teenager. "There's no need to drag Mark into this. This is between us, is it?" I folded my hands in my lap, surprised at how steady they actually felt. "Because it seems to me that when you bring three high-priced lawyers to what you called a reconciliation dinner, you've already invited a hell of a lot of people to this party." Richard Kirk cleared his throat, his face as smooth as polished granite. "Mrs. Johnson, perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. Family matters can be emotional, wouldn't you agree?" I met his icy gaze head-on. "How very thoughtful of you to notice. 23 minutes. That's how long it'll take Mark to get here from his apartment downtown if he catches all the green lights. 23 minutes for me to navigate this little landmine you and Brenda have so carefully set." Chad leaned forward, plastering that used car salesman's smile back on his face. "Look, Mrs. Johnson, Brenda, can I call you Brenda? We're going to be family soon. You may call me Mrs. Johnson." His smile flickered for a split second. "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. Look, I think there's been a slight misunderstanding here. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to help you manage your assets more efficiently. You know, maximize your returns. Ensure you're well positioned for a comfortable retirement." "I see. And how much, exactly, would this help cost me?" "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Your help managing my assets. What's your fee?" The lawyers were practically salivating, sensing weakness. But I wasn't the one who was about to crack. Chad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, there'd be some administrative costs, naturally. But really, this is about family, about making sure Brenda and the baby are taken care of." "The baby?" I turned to my daughter, who was suddenly fascinated by her freshly manicured nails. "Tell me, Brenda, when exactly did you and Chad start planning this little shindig?" "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. When did you call Chad's lawyer buddies? Before or after you invited me to this reconciliation dinner?" She finally lifted her chin, and I saw Robert's stubborn streak twisted into something ugly, something I barely recognized. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." "Fine," she spat out, the word sharp and brittle. "We've been discussing options for weeks, ever since you made it perfectly clear that you don't give a damn about my happiness or my future." "Options?" I repeated, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "Is that what we're calling extortion these days?" "It's not extortion." Brenda's voice rose, drawing annoyed glances from nearby tables. "It's family. It's what families do for each other." "What families do," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "support each other without resorting to lawyers and freaking ultimatums." One of the unnamed attorneys, younger than Kirk, and radiating the nervous energy of someone who was clearly new to this kind of dirty work, leaned forward. "Mrs. Johnson, if I may, you should know that grandparents' rights in this state are quite limited. If your daughter chooses to restrict access to her child, your legal recourse would be—" "Excuse me." The voice, deep and familiar, cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Mark stood beside our table, still wearing his hospital scrubs, his dark hair a mess from what must have been a hell of a rush drive. At 37, my son had inherited his father's solid presence and his grandmother's sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "I'm Dr. Johnson," he said to the table in general, though his gaze lingered a beat too long on Chad. "You called me, Mom?" "I did." I gestured to the empty chair the hostess had miraculously produced. "Mark, I'd like you to meet your sisters." "Colleagues." Mark's eyes scanned the table, taking in the lawyers, the manila folder, the palpable tension. As an emergency room physician, he'd learned to size up situations in seconds, and I watched as he cataloged every detail with a precision that had made him one of the youngest department heads at Methodist Hospital. "Colleagues," he repeated slowly. "I see. And they are." Chad stood, extending his hand. "Chad Sterling, your sister's fiancé." These are some business associates of mine. We were just discussing some financial planning with your mother. Mark shook Chad's hand briefly, then dropped it like it was contaminated. He sat down without even acknowledging the lawyers. Financial planning at Luigi's on a Tuesday night with Brenda 3 months pregnant. What's up with that? He turned to his sister, his expression unreadable. How are you feeling, by the way? Any complications? I'm fine, Brenda mumbled, her voice suddenly small and unsure. Good. That's good. Mark picked up the manila folder, flipped through it with the casual expertise of someone who'd seen his fair share of legal documents. Power of attorney. Interesting. Mom, did you ask for help managing your finances? I did not. He slammed the folder shut and set it aside. Chad, Brenda, gentlemen, would you mind giving me a moment alone with my mother? No, wait just a damn minute, Chad sputtered, but Mark cut him off. His voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I'm not asking. Something in my son's tone, the same unwavering authority he used when dealing with combative patients or hysterical family members in the ear, made the lawyers shift uncomfortably. Chad glanced at Brenda for backup, but she was back to staring at her hands. We'll be right over there, Richard Kirk said, gesturing towards the bar area. Mrs. Johnson, please don't make any hasty decisions. As soon as they were gone, Mark leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mom, talk to me. What the hell is really going on here? For the first time all night, I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Not tears of sadness or anger, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Relief, and a bone-deep sense of gratitude that at least one of my children still saw me as a person, and not just as a walking, talking ATM. They want me to sign over power of attorney, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Brenda says if I don't, I'll never see my grandchild. Mark was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table in that familiar rhythm he'd had since he was a kid, a telltale sign that he was deep in thought, working through a particularly complex problem. How much did they hit you up for originally for this wedding? 65. Oh. He let out a low whistle. And you offered 15. Oh. I said, nodding, which is generous. More than generous. He shot a sideways glance toward the bar, where Chad was gesticulating wildly at the lawyers, no doubt trying to figure out how his well-laid plans had just gone so spectacularly off the rails. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be 100% honest with me, okay? Okay. Are you having any problems? Memory issues? Confusion? Anything that would make them think you need help managing your affairs? I almost laughed, but the situation was way too messed up to be funny. Mark, just last month, I balanced my checkbook to the penny, renegotiated my car insurance to save $200 a year, and caught an error in my property tax assessment that saved me almost $800. Does that sound like someone who needs financial management? No, it damn well doesn't. His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw Robert's simmering rage flash in his eyes. Not the quick burst of irritation, but the deep, bone-chilling fury that came from witnessing a genuine injustice. It sounds like someone who taught her son how to manage his money so well that he graduated from medical school with minimal freaking debt. You worked hard for that. I worked hard because you taught me the value of hard work. You showed me how to sacrifice for what matters. He looked across the restaurant at Brenda, who was watching us with an expression couldn't even begin to decipher. What the hell happened to her, Mom? When did she turn into this? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, maybe even years. When had my daughter's ambition curdled into blatant entitlement? When had her dreams become demands? And when had her love become conditional, dependent on what I could provide, rather than who I simply was? I honestly don't know, hon, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Maybe I protected her too much. Maybe I made things too easy. Or maybe Chad just happened to her. I followed his gaze to where my daughter's fiancé was now glued to his phone, his voice animated, his free hand slicing through the air in sharp, imperious gestures. Even from across the room, I could see the naked calculation in his posture, the way he deliberately positioned himself to command attention, You think he's the one pulling the strings here? I think he's a man who sees a freaking opportunity. Daniel reached across the table and covered my hand with his. But I also think Brenda is 34 years old and perfectly capable of making her own damn choices. So the question is, Mom, what do you want to do about it? The new normal.